Hello, welcome back to my YouTube channel. This week's video is all about the prep. A little bit boring, but necessary. So this cabinet behind is an IKEA style cabinet. I don't actually know if it's from IKEA, but it's that kind of style. So it's not real wood, it's got a shiny finish to it, but it doesn't mean that you can't paint it and you can't upcycle it. So I'm going to show you how I do that with Dixie Belle products. Just a little bit about the piece before I go into showing you the prep work. I'm going to do this video in 2 stages because I have no idea what I'm going to do to this cabinet yet, but the prep work's always going to be the same. So no matter what you're doing and what paint you're putting on your piece, the prep work is always going to be the same. Well, it is for me anyway. So I'm going to do the prep and then I will do the finish in a separate video. So this video isn't going to be that long at all, and hopefully it will be useful, and then you can go on and paint your IKEA furniture in whatever finish and paint you like. So this cabinet was actually £1 from my charity shop. The original price sticker was £9.95. It had sat there for a few weeks unsold, and all of a sudden I went in one day and there was a £1 sticker on it, and I was like, I will take it for £1. I will take it. Take my £1 and I'll take the cupboard. So I got it in the car. I gave myself a little challenge to upcycle it and give it a new lease of life. There's a few issues with it. We'll go through that on the prep work video, and I'll show you the products that I'm going to use to get this ready to be painted. So the first thing, and arguably one of the most important things to do, is to clean your piece. This is irrelevant of whether you've picked it up secondhand, whether it's something you've owned for a while, or even if it is fairly new. And that's because you don't know what's on the surface, and something on the surface could be preventing the products that you're going to apply to stick to it, and that's the last thing that you want. So this is a super shiny surface. It looks immaculate, to be fair. I think I got a bargain for £1 actually, but nevertheless I am going to clean it. I'm using Dixie Belle's White Lightning and I'm going to scrub it all over. Once I've cleaned it, I then rinse my microfiber cloth out and make sure it's nice and damp, and then just go over the piece a couple of times to remove any cleaning residue. It's just like rinsing your hair once you've shampooed it. So next is to sort out these little raised bits on the top. I don't know if you can see them here, but there's 3, 4 little raised bits on the top, maybe a few more. Maybe more than I anticipated. Basically what's happened here is the factory finish, this white factory finish, has been compromised in the way of like a little hole being made in it, and that has allowed moisture or water to get into the chipboard, which I think this is what this is made out of, and that has expanded, and it's basically forced the factory finish to kind of expand a little bit. So we've got like these raised lumps on the top here. So I'm going to have to sand that flat and then use a filler to make sure that I've got a nice smooth surface, because if I just paint straight over that or prime straight over that, you'll be able to see those marks. They'll show up through the paint. So we want to make sure that it's a nice smooth surface, and that's what we're going to do next. So I'm using my electric sander to do this, but if you don't have an electric sander, you don't need to use one. You can actually just sand this by hand with some normal sandpaper. I'm using a 180 grit here to take that off. There was also some chips to the finish on the rest of the piece, so again I'm just taking my sander and sanding those completely smooth. Anywhere where I can see that the original factory finish is chipped away or rough, I'm going to sand smooth, and you can just run your hand over and make sure that it's nice and smooth to touch. And then the next bit didn't film because I am a huge idiot and I forgot to press the film button, which is kind of essential when you're filming. And obviously I only had one take at this because once I'd filled the holes, it was done. I couldn't retake the content. So I filled the holes on the top here. I have got a still image of this, which I'm just slowly panning across now so you can see it in detail. I used Dixie Mud in white. I just used a tongue depressor to just fill over those areas that I'd sanded back. And at this stage, don't worry about it looking perfect. What you want to do is actually overfill the holes to make sure that the filler is slightly raised from the rest of the surface. So because I'd only applied this thinly, it didn't take long for it to dry at all. And then I'm using a Dixie Belle sanding sponge, which is equivalent to a 220 grit. And I'm just going to hand sand this flat. Now I'm not using my electric sander because it's way too harsh and I don't need it to be in this situation. I just want to make sure that the surface is nice and smooth. So I'm just doing it super gently with a sanding sponge. And you can see I just keep running my hand over the surface to make sure it's nice and flat. Once it is, I just grab a microfiber cloth, spritz it with a little bit of tap water and just remove any dust on the surface. Next up is the magic ingredient. This is called Slick Stick and it's an adhesion primer, and this provides a perfect surface to paint on and gives you the grip that you need on slippy surfaces. So surfaces like my little cabinet behind. You can also use this on plastic, glass, laminate, metal. It's got so many uses and it just lets you paint pieces or items that you would struggle to get paint to stick to ordinarily. You'll see me using it in this. So I'll squeeze it out of this onto a paper plate and then I'm going to roller it on. The reason I put it in here is because this stuff is incredibly tough and I'm a messy painter. So I always leave drips around the lid and it's incredibly hard to get the lids off once this stuff has bonded. So I always decant some in a squeezy tube. It just makes it easier for me to get in and out, and also it just stops the end getting all gunked up and it keeps my tubs nice and clean so I don't have to worry about getting the lid off. So as I mentioned, I'm just going to squeeze a load of this out onto a paper plate. You can also use a roller tray as well, which is the proper equipment to use, but I'm using a paper plate because that's just how I roll. Just going to squeeze out a load on here and I'm going to roller this starting with the top, and don't worry about applying this super thickly. You just need 2 even coats of Slick Stick and obviously allowing it to dry in between. So I'm going to start with the top and then with the excess on my roller, I'm not going to add any more product. I'm just going to catch all the edges, and then for all 4 sides I'm going to do exactly the same process. So I'm going to start off with a synthetic brush and just do all the kind of nooks and crannies which my roller won't be able to get into. And then for the large flat surfaces, just roller that in between. So like I mentioned, this is a water-based primer. You don't need any special chemicals to clean this up, so it's super easy to clean your brushes and rollers afterwards. There's also no odour, unlike some primers on the market. It's really, really easy to apply. You need 2 thin coats of Slick Stick and allowing it to dry for a couple of hours in between. The most important thing with Slick Stick is to allow it to dry for 24 hours before you apply any paint. So that allows the product to dry down sufficiently enough and bond to the surface that you are painting, and it just gives you the adequate dry time for the product to work to its best potential. So I've just done that first thin coat all over, and when I know that I've got to come back to something and put an identical second coat on, what I do is get my brush, roller, whatever, put them inside a plastic bag, squeeze all the air out of it, seal it up. If you've got a bag that seals, great. If not, use a hair bubble or elastic band or a bit of tape. Seal it so that no air can get in and dry your brushes out or your rollers out. And when you can also pop them in the fridge if you're somewhere really hot, but I don't bother because I'm in the UK. So I will be able to come back to these when this first coat's dry and go straight with my second coat without having to wash my brushes in between. Your second coat goes on pretty much exactly the same as your first one. Just make sure your first coat has dried thoroughly before you do apply your second coat. And this is not footage of me applying the second coat. This is footage of me having hindsight and deciding to paint the interior. So I took all the door off, took the hinges off, and I'd already cleaned it and rinsed it when I prepped the piece because I always do that anyway, but I did decide that I was going to paint the interior of this. I'm going to go straight over that backing, the stripe backing, and just apply the Slick Stick in exactly the same way that I applied it on the exterior of the piece. So like I was saying, the second coat applies exactly the same way as the first. If you do have any brush strokes or unwanted texture in your first coat, you can just give that a really light sand between coats to make sure you've got a super smooth finish. And then, like I say, make sure you leave it for 24 hours before you start painting. So that's where we're ending this week's project. It seems a little bit odd to end a video with something that's half finished, but I will be posting the second half of the video in a few weeks, so stay tuned and make sure you subscribe to the channel to find out what I do with it. Hopefully that's helped you with how to prep your IKEA style cabinets, and that goes for anything that is basically not a solid wooden surface. That's the process that I would always do, no matter the finish that I'm doing, whether I'm using an all-in-one type paint like silk, or whether I am using a chalk mineral paint or a clay-based paint like terra clay paint. I'd always do this prep for this style of furniture. So stay tuned to find out what I do with it, and I will catch you next time. Bye!